Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm so excited to have Farnoosh Torabi on the show today. So Farnoosh is a speaker, author, writer, podcaster, TV host, and just all-around finance guru that's going to actually be a keynote presenter at XYPN 17 this year in Dallas. I actually met Farnoosh on a Starbucks patio a few blocks away from a conference that we were both attending several years ago, and I had no idea who she was at the time. We ended up periscoping to her audience, and I got the opportunity to learn more about her journey, and the impact she's making in the personal finance community. This interview really focused on her journey to becoming a personal finance expert and how she built her brand, which started by publishing her first book called You're So Money, which is also the title of her very popular podcast. Now, her third book was titled When She Makes More, which is a deep dive into the issues and realities that couples face when the female in the relationship makes more money than the male. And I personally feel it's critically important for advisors to recognize these issues and be able to advise clients around them. If you're on the fence about coming to XYPN 17, I'm betting this interview will make you want to buy your ticket today. It's going to be an awesome conference. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/109. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Farnoosh. Hey, Farnoosh, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Hi, Alan. It's so nice to connect with you. How are you?
I am doing awesome, and I am so excited that we're going to be meeting up here in about 6 weeks in Dallas because you're going to be one of our keynote presenters at XYPN 17.
I'm so excited. I was really flattered that you reached out. I love talking to this audience. It's important that the market's changing. Our needs as consumers and investors are changing. So it's an important thing to be doing.
Yeah, and we tried to get you last year, but you are a very busy schedule. So last year we couldn't make it work, but this year we were like, okay, this is a topic that we definitely want to hear about. And we're definitely going to talk more later in this show about sort of the overall topic that you're going to be talking about. But I will take a step back, as I always do at the beginning of the show, just because I'm fascinated by how people end up where they are. Because we always sort of have this illusion when we're in college that there's going to be this linear career path, that you just sort of go into a career and you climb the corporate ladder and boom, you're at the top of the corporate ladder. And yet I've never actually talked to anyone that's been their career path. So I guess, how did you get into, well, first, how would you describe yourself? I mean, how do you introduce yourself to people that don't know you? Because I could throw out about 100 words, I think, to describe what you do.
Yeah, I think that for me, my elevator pitch is constantly evolving, which I think is a good thing, but it does force me to always be thinking about what is the concise way to present myself. And so these days, if I'm meeting someone for the first time and they're like, what do you do? I'd say I'm a financial expert and I work across various mediums. I have a podcast. I have best-selling books. I speak, and I also have hosted television shows. And I kind of stop there and let, the conversation go where it may. It's one of those things where sometimes, depending on who's asking, I might tweak it. I might say I run my own business and I have a media company, which is also technically true because I do all of my work under, a corporation, and I feel like I'm constantly in producer mode. And so with personal finance as my hook, if someone, I would say, if someone's like a fashion designer or a fashion consultant, they may do what I do, but all under the fashion vein, and I do it under the money vein. So it's fun. I love my career path. Every year is different, and it's so that makes it a little nauseating because I don't know what my income is going to be or what my projects will be. But fortunately, I've been very fortunate, but I also know that it does require a good bit of hustle and networking. And I invest a lot in just meeting people and taking on opportunities, even if they don't pay, because I know it's going to unlock potentially other projects that would, and so at this point, I've also been doing this for so long that I have good instincts about what would be a good way for me to invest my time, my money, and what wouldn't be to then get to the next level.
I love what you said about that. It evolves all the time. And so I've always joked that my parents have no idea what I do for a living, which is mainly amusing because my mom does the books for XY Planning Network. So she has as good an idea as anyone should. And my dad asked me the other day, he said, okay, so I had a handle on what you do and now you have this other project. So what do you do exactly? And I've just given up. I gave him the pitch, but I've just given up on even trying to keep up with how do you describe this ever evolving career? Because it's weird. I don't know. Maybe it's imposter syndrome or what it is. But I always feel awkward telling people I own a business or run a business. It feels like arrogant to me. I don't know if I was like, oh, I work at blah blah blah. I wouldn't feel awkward about it. But like I co-founded XYPN Network, like it's awkward to say for some reason for me.
I don't think you're alone there. And actually I was at an event the other day and someone was like, I feel weird, promoting my business. And someone said to this person, don't think of it like that. Think of it that you are providing this enormous service to the world. And if you really believe in what you're doing, it is your job. It is your responsibility to get what you're doing out there and to let people know about it and feel proud about that. It's not like the world is doing you a favor all the time. Like you're out there doing important things, helping people, and that's important. And you want to get that out there. If you actually believe that what you're doing can change lives and what you do does change lives, Alan, that's something to be very proud of, and to want to put that out there in the world as much as possible is important.
Yeah. And I think advisors struggle with the same thing. I mean, one, because whenever we say, hi, I'm a financial planner, and I wonder if you deal with this, whenever you say you're a finance expert, people are automatically just like, crap, they're about to sell me insurance. And it's like, no, that's not what we do. It had nothing to do with that. And even for you to say a finance expert, like, I assume you get the same questions I do. Like, oh, well, what stock should I buy? Like, that is not what I do. So it's always tough to describe financial planning, just sort of this intangible thing of financial services. I don't know. It's interesting, but so how did you become a money expert? I guess, what was your path into becoming, sort of getting into this career path?
I think the journey started all the way back when I was growing up in Massachusetts with my immigrant parents from the Middle East. And in our culture, money is not taboo. We talk about it openly. Dinners were often, we talked about everything from, real estate values to my dad's job and things that were going well, things that weren't going well, what things cost. I always joke that when my mom and I get together and she's like, I'll tell her like, I bought this new coat or whatever. She'll be like, great. How much was it? She always wants to know like how much things cost. It's just like her instant reflex. And that is kind of mine, but I know sometimes not to ask that question because it's not polite when you don't know who you're talking to. But, what I want to say is that I had this fluency around money growing up, and it was not this difficult thing to grasp, at least not conversationally. And then when I got into school and college, I didn't really know that I wanted to be the person that I am today. I don't think I ever imagined I would get to this point at age, 18, 19. I didn't even know I could do what I'm doing at that point. Like you said, it's just going to a job and staying there and climbing the corporate ladder. But I majored in finance in college, mainly because I wanted to get a return on my investment. My father is a scientist, and he's very much like cause effect, and so growing up, I had a very rational upbringing. Like everything had to kind of pay off, all these decisions that we were facing, whether it was, whether we should take this course or take this job or go to major in this particular subject matter. My dad was always like, well, do what you want, but ultimately, make sure that it's also going to give you a return on your quote unquote investment, whether that's an investment of your time, your money. So I invested my time in college by studying finance, because what better route? You get out of school and you make a job get a job making money. It was a very, at least from my school, I went to Penn State. It was a very linear path. You know, you majored in this and you got a job at a bank or whatever. And for me, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was torn. I thought I wanted to, at one point, be a lawyer. I thought I wanted to be an actress. I thought I wanted to be a writer. And I realized I want to do all those things in some way. I want to like have a career that's analytical, that I can be in front of people and there's maybe a performing aspect to it, but it also, you know, is intellectual. And I found that the combination of media and business ultimately was that sweet spot for me and allowed me to integrate all the things that I really enjoyed doing. And from money to performance to communication, writing. And once I finished my degree in finance, I decided to go get a master's in journalism and go to New York and do that and start my career as a financial journalist. It was not something that I knew going into school. I realized it actually midway through college at an internship at CNBC in New York City. And I was working on the advertising side of the business, not the media side. And I was sitting there like, you know, appreciative of where I was. And I was so like, you know, just a deer in headlights, like New York City, first time in my life, working at a network in Rockefeller Center. I was so happy. But I also realized that summer that I really kept wanting I was so curious about the media side of the CNBC world, you know, like the reporters, the producers. That was really what I was drawn to, not so much like making PowerPoint presentations about sales and marketing and Excel sheets. I could do that, but it wasn't what really like, you know, excited me. So I realized that summer, you know, maybe I should try to combine this financial background that I was getting in college with a media degree, like a journalism degree, and then break out as a financial journalist. And at that point, I had a lot of great people that I could look up to who were doing that, you know, whether it was people at CNBC or there was also CNN had a network at the time called CNN FN, which is now defunct, but basically it was their financial network. There was Bloomberg and Reuters. And so I knew that there was a job market for what I wanted to do. So that's kind of where I guess I got my footing, and then worked at Money Magazine out of grad school. And so maybe you want to stop me here, but there was another like epiphany that I had at Money Magazine that allowed me to really see the potential of this industry and how I could play a role in it, that I didn't just have to stay at Money Magazine for 50 years, which is what some people do. And that's a very fine track. But while I was there, I got the opportunity to work under Jean Chatzky, who many of you know. She is the Today Show financial contributor. She's a multiple best-selling author, speaker. She was kind of the first person I recognized, and still looking back, I don't think anyone was. I mean, this is before I even knew who Susie Orman was. I knew Jean Chatzky. She was really a personal brand in the financial sector. And I got the privilege to work with her and see how she was able to orchestrate this incredible career for herself that was so diverse. That's what really excited me. I'm like, one day she's out giving a talk. Another day she's doing a segment on TV. She's doing a column. She's writing. It was so, active and lively. I was really excited by that. So I thought, you know what? I want to do something like that. And I knew that for her anchor in her career was book writing. Like whenever she wrote a book, and she's written so many books, it got her out there. She would do a lot of TV. She would do a lot of speaking on books. So I thought, maybe I should write a book. Maybe someday I'll do that. And that can help to get me to this next level of being still a financial reporter and a financial kind of advice giver, but maybe that could also allow me to be self-employed or have an entrepreneurial agenda within this world. And it did. I wrote a book in 2008, and that really took on a life of its own. And that was my first book, You're So Money. And from there, I mean, for me, I just thought, oh, this will be great. I'll write this book. I'll get on the Today Show. I did get on the Today Show, but then I'd also like got brand partnerships, and I got a TV show, and like things just started coming at me really fast. And it was the recession. So personal finance news was like everything and all over the place. And so I was quite busy. And I've just been building on that momentum. Funny enough, I also got laid off at the same time as all this exciting stuff was happening. And, and it was like, maybe this is my calling. Maybe I need to stop working at a desk and actually get out there more in the world and take this jump. And I did. And that is how we are here today. I've just been building on that momentum.
What an awesome, awesome story. There's so many things we could talk about. And it really does. People always ask me, like, what's the similarity between the success stories that you have on the podcast? You know, between the similarity and sort of that common thread between people that have been successful and been entrepreneurs and built their business, and versus the people that you meet that haven't been able to make that leap or just haven't found success doing that. And it always comes down to just chasing the opportunities that are presented. You know, and I do not remember who the quote was from, but it says, you know, when opportunity knocks, do you open the door or do you just complain about the noise? And I think that, and it's so true, because it's just like, I think opportunity is in front of everyone, and it really does just come down to, do you chase it? And do you take the time to figure out what you really want? And you mentioned that about seeing Gene Chatsky and the diverse job, right? For most people, I bet that lifestyle and that job is hell. Like that would just crumple someone to never really know on a month to month basis what you're going to be doing the next month and where the money's going to come from and all that. But for others of us, that's what really drives you. And to understand that, because if I stuck you behind a desk from 9 to 5 and said, like, just pump out great books, you would fold. You know, like that would just suck the life out of you. So it is so important to figure out what drives you from a career perspective, and like, what do you need from your career to be satisfied, and then just chase it.
No, I 100% agree. And as an example of that, I remember way back when I was at Money Magazine, I was just starting out. I remember a publicist for the magazine came into the newsroom and she said, "Hey guys, gals, we have an opportunity. CNN wants to interview somebody from the staff to talk about our new issue, Best Places to Live in America," I think it was. And who wants to do it? And nobody raised their hand, because they were like, oh, like you said, like, oh, this is like, I got work to do. I don't want to do this. I have to go all the way up to Midtown. It's going to be 2 hours. And I was like, pick me. And I just started, like, but they picked me because literally nobody else would do it. So, and she put me on the air, and I remember being in the cab, like memorizing the press release and reading the article and trying to think in my head, like, how to answer questions concisely. And age 21 or 22, I was like live on CNN for the first time in my life. Terrifying, but I got through it. In my mind, I remember thinking, it's just 3 minutes. Just get it together. Like, you know, like, you can do this. It's just 3 minutes. Just smile. Just, you know, talk slowly. Get your words out. And yeah, I remember I used that clip. I milked that clip, you know, I got that, put it on my reel. I used that. I leveraged it to get other TV stuff, and slowly building my experience as a, you know, broadcaster. And it wouldn't have been that way unless I just, you know, just took that leap of faith and applied for something that I wasn't qualified for. I wasn't qualified to be on CNN, you know, Alan. I really should have been staying at my desk that day, but nobody else wanted to do it, you know, said I'll do it. And it took someone to believe in me, and there I was. And so I agree. You have to not only recognize the opportunities, but really put yourself in front of them. And how you recognize opportunities, because that's another skill that I think develops over time, is like getting that instinct about, oh, this is actually really a good opportunity. That maybe it was presented in one way, but you have to think, well, how else can I really leverage this? You know, for a lot of people who heard go on CNN at 3:00, they're like, oh, I have to go get my tie on. Or women were like, I had to go, like, you know, put on my lipstick. I got to leave. I have a deadline. I have to, like, it's 3 hours. It's the commute. Oh my gosh. But they're not thinking, I mean, depends on your goals. I mean, my goal was to ultimately get out there more. So this for me was a no brainer. And I was like, whether this takes 5 hours, I don't care if I'm not wearing the perfect outfit today, but whatever, you know, I'll stop on the way there and grab something at Ann Taylor.
So The book or writing the book for you was huge. And Kitsis has always told me writing books is a terrible business. It's all the things that the book leads to that's the good business. And we have seen that. We certainly did not write a bestseller. We did write a book that has led to other opportunities. So I've seen this a little bit. But I guess tell me a little bit about the book writing project. And just, do you just sit down and start cranking and just type in words? Because this was 2008. So 9 years ago now. So
how did I get the book deal? It started with first.
Oh, no, you had a book deal then. It wasn't just you sitting down and starting to write.
This was before self-publishing was really a thing. So the real route to getting a book out there in the world was convincing a publisher to take you on. And I was nobody. I was just this producer at the time at a television station behind the scenes. I had a column in a free newspaper in New York that they distribute on the subways. That was my claim to fame at the time. I had a byline in AM New York, which actually people read. And I remember going to a store and handing my credit card to the sales lady, and she read my card and she's like, "Oh, do you write for AM New York?" And I'm like, "Seriously? Wow, I got to stick with this gig. This is going to get me places." But I remember thinking, I want to write a book about something. I don't know what yet. And as my role as a producer at the station, I would interview a lot of authors all the time for my work on camera, for sourcing. And I got into the habit of asking all of these authors on their way out the door as they were done with their segment or whatever. I'd say, "Hey, so your book is amazing. How did you get published? What made you want to become an author?" I would just start having these conversations with real authors about their process. And they would give me a lot of great tips. And then finally it took one author to say to me, "Are you thinking of writing a book?" And I said, "Actually, I am, but I don't really know how to get started. I write about money for this newspaper. I work in the business unit of this TV station. I feel like there's something here that I can really offer to the world, that I come across so many great stories all the time." And she said, "Well, let me put you in touch with my literary agent." It was that simple. But notice I was still so young and naive that intimidated that I didn't just say that immediately. It took this woman to kind of take it out of me. She was like, "Are you interested in writing a book? What's your topic?" I wasn't coming out and just aggressively doing it, which maybe was better that way, but everything has its process. And so she put me in touch with her literary agent. We had really good conversations, kind of brainstorming ideas. And through that relationship, I came up with the idea to write a book about personal finance for young adults. That book ultimately sold to Random House. And from there, Random House assigns you an editor. You work on the book for probably like 8-9 months together. And then usually the book comes out 6 months after that. So usually it takes like 2 years, I'd say, from finishing your book proposal to getting a publishing deal to then getting your book out there on bookshelves. And so it's a slow process. It can be faster. Yeah, but it's a process, which is why people like the self-publishing route. They can get their ideas out there into the world faster and obviously without any barriers to entry. But for me, I think it was important to go through the very traditional process. And at the time, the traditional process was still what I guess the networks and the major magazines and the quote unquote, world really respected. Like, to have a book from Random House it still is a huge deal. But even then, back then, it was kind of, quite the ultimate. So that was the process for me back then. And I will say that it wasn't this, national bestseller. The book actually, despite getting a ton of press and helping me professionally, getting out there and being more recognized for the work that I do, it wasn't this killer sales book, which was actually a surprise to a lot of the people who worked on it, including me. We were like, really, what's going on? It was the recession. People weren't buying books on anything and maybe didn't feel they wanted to buy a finance book. I don't know what it is. Books are hard to sell. They're really hard to sell.
They're very low margin. So like, how much money can you spend marketing a book? Like, if you spend $10 to sell a book that costs $20, not exactly a good return.
Publishers, it's a really tough business model for them, obviously. And these days, I mean, that was, gosh, 12 years ago, or 10 years ago. So it's even harder now to break through the noise. But the book was, for me, just a huge way to get out there in the world. I got on the Today Show, and then that got me on other networks and caught the attention of people who worked in the branding world. I got deals with banks to go out there and talk to their customers about personal finance, got on TV shows, hosting shows. But I said, also at that time, I got laid off from my desk job at the time I was working at thestreet.com, and got caught up in a huge layoff there. But honestly, I had been thinking about going it alone. I was too scared to actually make the move myself. And sometimes I say the best decisions in life are the ones that are made for you. It's like you're losing your job. You can't come back here tomorrow. So that's
You'll find another way to make money.
You gotta just go with plan B.
So your first book was You're So Money. So just give me a quick overview. What was the theme of that book?
The theme of that book was young money, how to teach young people in their 20s how to make the most of their paychecks. And this was pre-iPhone and, pre-apps, really. I mean, I think the only app that existed was like Mint, and it wasn't even an app. It was a website. There weren't a lot of tools out there to really guide young people. And of course, they were raised with probably very little financial literacy. So my hope was to provide this book to really guide them to make those important first steps, have those first steps be healthy ones, making sure they got, but it was a fun book. It was a book about recognizing that when you're in your 20s, you want to have fun, you want to socialize, you want to discover yourself, and that costs money. So how do you do all of those things under budget? And the subtitle of the book was Live Rich Even When You're Not. And Jim Cramer actually wrote the foreword to the book. I was working with Jim at the time at thestreet.com. He was a huge fan of the book, wanted it to do well, and provided me with not just the foreword, but he wrote the investing chapter as well. Again, having his support too was, I think, I have to credit him so much for helping me in the early stages of my career, just so gracious and generous. And he didn't really have to help me. Why would he have to help me? But he decided that he wanted to really invest in my success, and it has paid off so well. And I am so appreciative to his support. He's like one of my biggest champions. He's a great guy.
Oh, I love it. So that then led to, you have a second book. So how long until you got the itch to write a book again? Because I feel like when you're first done writing a book, you think like, I'm never, ever going to do that ever again.
Yeah. And to be very honest, my publisher, because the sales were kind of meh, and like everyone who was on my team at Random House was no longer there because the recession created a lot of layoffs, but also there was a lot of overlap as a result of mergers, because the publishing world is now just like two places and it's like two houses, and like everyone's combining forces. And so there was a lot of layoffs, and people just left too because they were overworked and burnt out. My editor went to law school, which I don't know was like why you go from editing to law school. It's like rock hard place, but it was hard for me to convince the existing publisher to work with me again. Frankly, they were like, we just can't afford it. And I was like, okay, but I guess I'll see you later. And then my literary agent also retired. I was like, I thought I was never going to write a book again. I was like, maybe this is the universe telling me that I should, do something else. And I continued to do the work that I was doing. I had a TV show called Bank of Mom and Dad, where I was helping young people with their finances. And through that work, I really started to, get the sense that money is not just managing your money is not just a matter of being organized and having the tools and, the Excel spreadsheet. It's also a psychological feat that you have to have the right mindset. You have to be willing. You have to be not in a scarcity mindset. You have to, there's all these things. And that there was also a lot of studies coming out at that time. This is what's around 2009, 2008, 2009, 2010. We were learning a lot more about behavioral finance, and there was a lot of critical thinking around that and studies. And so I paired the data that was out there with my own experiences helping people one-on-one now, because my work had now brought me into people's homes and helping them and really getting to know people and just sort of navigating all the emotions around money. I decided that my next book would be about the psychology of money. Now, I didn't have a literary agent. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I just have this idea and it's just going to sit with me for a while. But my talent agent, whom I've been with for 10 years, ran into a publisher through his networking and told them that I had this TV show and had this book idea. And they were like, we love it. We want Farnoosh to write this book. And I got a smaller advance because that's just what happens. And but I didn't care. I don't write books to make money from the book. I write books so that I can get my word and I can get my thoughts out there and I can leverage that book really well. I know, I may not know how to get on the New York Times bestseller list, and anyone who tells you they know how to do that is lying. But I do know how to, really take advantage of your book to get out there and just make more of the success that you have through it. And I just said, I just have to get this book out. So I got that book out in 2010. It was called Psych Yourself Rich. Get the mindset and discipline. I forget the rest of it. To get the mind. It's been a long time. Psych Yourself Rich. Get the mindset and discipline you need to build your financial life. And with that book, with the help of my, at that point, talent agent, we got tons of meetings. This is what you do when you get a book out. You got to get meetings with the networks and the production companies. They need to know who you are. They need to embrace your ideas. And at the time, there were many talk shows that were launching. And I had the opportunity to become Nate Berkus's go-to money expert on his talk show that was launching at the time. And through that, got a lot more visibility, which then leads to more speaking, which then leads to, all this great stuff. So that was in 2010. And then I was like, I'm done, with books. I'm just so done. Every time I think I'm done. But then I got married and I was like, I'm struggling a little bit with my financial life. And not because it wasn't a dollars and cents, it wasn't an Excel spreadsheet problem, or it wasn't like a spending problem or a saving problem. It was, again, like an emotional situation that I was in. I felt like for the first time in my own financial life, I had a question I couldn't answer. And that was, I'm making more in my relationship than my husband. And I know it shouldn't feel weird, but it does. And I don't know why. And I want to explore this. And I knew that whatever book I wanted to write next, I wanted it to be for women. I wanted it to come really from the heart. And I wanted it to be talking about a topic that nobody was talking about. There are a lot of books out there for women, by women, that are great, that are about how to build your financial wealth as a female, how to, the Go Girl finance books. And I love that they're all out there, but I didn't want to just add to that. I didn't want to just add to that echo chamber. I wanted to write something that was maybe even controversial, but really got into the zeitgeist of the modern woman today and how she's feeling about her money. And when I started to explore this outside of my world, realized there was a lot of compelling data out there around female breadwinners. I learned that when she makes more in a relationship, she doesn't feel so great. He feels emasculated. There's a higher risk for divorce. There's a higher risk for infidelity. All these complications just over the fact that there's a woman in the relationship making more than the man.
That's fascinating. That and I haven't been in that situation, but I don't even know if I would recognize, I guess, that it's just interesting that it has so many repercussions that you're probably not aware of until you're in that position.
Right. And let me tell you, there were people who were totally on board with this idea with me, like my literary agent at the time. I found a new literary agent through a friend, again, just networking, like talking to people and telling them your ideas. That's important. You got to tell people your ideas. Don't keep them inside. And even though sometimes people feel like, oh, someone's going to steal my idea, that happens sometimes, but I just feel like there's 99% of the time, good things come out of you just putting your thoughts out there in the world. and trusting the right people. Like, don't, maybe just tell anyone, but tell people you trust and who believe in you and support you. And it took one person to believe and support my idea for this book. And he was like, let me introduce you to my literary agent. I think she would love this. And she did. But as we were shopping around the proposal, what was really funny was that there were editors who were like, oh my God, finally someone's bringing this to the surface. We want to buy this book. And then others were saying, we think Farnoosh is naive. We think this idea is just something she's made up in her head, that it's at the time it was 2014. Really, is this something that we really need to like be obsessed about? Like, whatever, women make more than men, deal with it, the end. And my literary agent said, you know what? It's great actually that you're getting such disparate points of view on this, that you have on the one side, people who are just feverishly awaiting this book to come out. Feverishly, what's the word? And then you have people, I don't know. I haven't finished my coffee yet. And then there are people who are like just so opposed to even just the concept of this being a book. And she's like, that's when you know you have a great book on your hands. If this is something that everybody agreed with, then maybe it's not really worth writing about. But if you have opposing points of view, then that that is, when this book comes out, it's going to create just really rich conversation and dialogue. And that's ultimately what you want, right? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So it went to auction, it sold, and it was hard actually, to convince a publisher, not so hard, but people did come up like, so your first book was a critical success. It did well in the media. It helped your career, but like the numbers, the sales weren't so hot. And then your second book, again, had critical acclaim, got on the Today Show, helped your career, but the sales were not, it wasn't like a bestseller. What makes you think this will be a bestseller? And, publishers have to take a leap on this, and they have to kind of hope that it will do well. And I said, that was 10 years ago. That was 6 years ago. Today, I'm just doing so much more. I have online audience, traditional audience. I feel like also this is a book that will really, there's nothing like it out there. And you know what? The book came out. I got on every single network. I was on Morning Joe, Fox, Today Show, CNN. I was in every magazine. The Kindle sales did really well. The hardcover did okay. The paperback's doing well. I think it's just the kind of book that people would like to read in private. And it's not like you want to open the book up and show everyone that you're reading a book called When She Makes More. And my publisher thinks that maybe it was a little bit ahead of its time. Now, I think we're talking about it a lot more. The book continues to be something that people reference, and it comes up a lot. And I find that people who didn't read the book assume that it's going to be something that will tell them that we should go back to the 1950s and that I'm critical of women making more, which is completely not the case. I am in this boat. I want these kinds of relationships to thrive. I think that we need to be really honest and transparent and realistic about where we are psychologically with this reality, that on paper, it seems like this should be no problem. And we're in the 21st century and we should just get with the program. But as human beings, we are hardwired to think differently and act differently, and to be very attached to our masculinity and our femininity and what money means as a woman, as a man. And I know it's stereotypes that we have to conquer, but it is where we are at. And I think it would be unfair to say just deal with it, because couples can't, they're getting divorced. And so I want to help them. And I remember, being at a conference and talking about this book, and I was with other women who had written different books about career. And I was at the afternoon book selling session, and I was sitting at my desk waiting for people to come up and buy the book. And, people were coming, and I was sitting next to a woman who had written a book called The Confidence Code, which was like, there was a line of people with multiple books in their hands. And I was sitting there next to her, like every few minutes, somebody might come up and buy one book. And she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, you wrote When She Makes More? I love that book." And I said, "You did? Well, can you tell these people here that you love it? Because no one's buying the book." But what I realized then was that when you write a book called Confidence Code, like Of course, like women want to give that, they celebrate it. It's like, it's not something to be ashamed of when you're opening it up and reading it, like, or that it's not going to disclose anything about your life or reveal anything about your life. But when a title is called When She Makes More, it's very revealing and maybe you don't want to reveal it. But I will say one woman came up to me. She charged at me. I was like, oh my God, this woman's going to start yelling at me. I don't know what's going on. I kind of braced for something. And she said, your book changed my life. It saved my marriage. And I thought, oh my God, before I saw her, I wanted to crawl under the desk and go away. But when I heard her come down the aisle and tell me that, and I just lost it, I was like, thank you so much. This was like the heavens were hearing my inner thoughts. They wanted me to have a sign, and you are my sign that I need to keep doing this work and that this message is important. And if I can save one marriage, my work is done, And she was like, I absolutely love the book. I took notes. I shared it with my husband. We were in a really tough place in our marriage because I was making more and it was really impacting our love life and our relationship and our connection. And you really just made it so much clearer for us. And I started a book club and I want to support other women in this situation and couples. And I just lost it. I was like, thank you so much. I don't know what to say. I mean, this was such a gift to hear this from this woman, give me this feedback, made it worth it for me. So you get these drops of inspiration in your life and it reminds you why your work is important. And I think that your audience, everyone in XY Planning Network, I mean, you are changing lives. You may not hear it all the time and you may start to doubt yourself sometimes. Like, am I in the right place? Am I giving the right advice? You just have to trust your gut and know that if you feel like your advice is changing even just one person's life, I mean, gosh, that's not everyone can say that their work changes lives.
No, it's a great point. And it's a struggle sometimes because especially when you're starting a business, you're going to hear 10 times more no's than yeses, and it's not like you walk into your first, the first prospective client meeting and they're just excited to sign up and there's no questions. You go to a networking event, land 10 clients the same way you didn't go and pitch, your first book publisher and they just signed up on the spot and wrote you a big check. It's just not the way it works. And being able to stay motivated and again, keeping your eyes on the prize and remembering why we do what we do, not just the what, is huge. But I am curious, have you found a fairly sizable readership that are men? Because I do feel like while the book was written for women, this is a topic that for men that are in this situation could probably be very impactful for them.
Yes, I actually wrote a blog post about the men who wrote in to talk about how they love the book or they really related to the book. They said, thank you for writing the book. This has really helped our relationship. Ultimately, when you write a book, you have to pick an audience. You have to pick sort of your ideal audience. And it's important to narrow it down. But I think my goal was that I wanted to help relationships through women, through the wives, that they would hopefully take this book into their relationships after having read it, or they would read it together with their partners. And that did happen in some cases. At least I heard anecdotally from people. And some men would say that it's not a problem in our relationship. Some would say, thank you for writing this and recognizing my feelings in your book, because I do have a whole chapter dedicated to men and how men think and how men associate their self-worth with their net worth and how that can muck up, communication and intimacy in a relationship when he's not the quote unquote financial provider. So, and there's a lot of science behind that and behavioral science and gender science. And I really wanted to make this book for everybody, but the men found it, the men who are in these relationships, I think really appreciated the book and told me about it.
So one of the really interesting things to me, and you mentioned this in your bio on your website, which I love, by the way. So for anyone listening that's trying to figure out how to write a compelling bio, go to Farnoosh's website, because you have the professional bio, but then the real story. And I love that. I love the little tidbits and all of it. But one of the things you mentioned in here, and I think this is something that financial advisors are concerned about. We get a lot of questions about this when we named our company XY Planning Network, was how do you grow up with your readership or with your client base? Because when you first started writing, I mean, you were writing to the sort of the mid 20 somethings. And this last book is very much geared towards an older than your mid 20s. So maybe that 30s or early 40s. How has it been to sort of grow up with your audience instead of trying to stay just focused on the 20 somethings, even as you sort of age out of that demographic?
It's not something that I've really been super conscious of. I think that I just stay really true to myself, and I keep abreast of what's going on out there in the world. I read a lot. I have a podcast, so I talk to people about money all the time. So I feel like I'm very much aware of what people want to know about, are struggling with, and I respond to it. And I don't really think of it as like necessarily an age thing anymore, but more of just sort of a psychographic, because I'll meet people in their 20s who are more mature than people in their 30s financially, and people in their 60s who don't have a retirement account yet, and people in their 20, they're 35 and they're retired. So I feel like I don't really think of it anymore as these silos of age. I just think of it as, where are you in your life stage? What are you struggling with? And how can I help you? And I don't really think of age as a way to, filter out my audience but I will say that because of where I am in my life stage, I think people who come to me partly because they relate to me. So I do find that people who listen to the show, my podcast, or read my books now, I have something for everybody. I've that book, You're So Money Still, I think, is evergreen. If you're 25, 19, you'll love it. But people who I think are naturally drawn to my voice and my take on things are in their 30s and are starting to get to that stage in life where they're quote unquote settling down, maybe partnering up, having a child or two, buying a home. And so I find myself talking about those things more and more and more. And I'm really interested now in talking about earning more. And I think that is something that everybody at any life stage wants to hear and talk about. So I find these common ground topics that I find can apply to anybody. And giving my perspective might skew my audience a little bit more towards my demographic. But, I find that I get a nice mix. I actually surveyed my podcast listeners. It's split down the middle, men, women. They tend to be in their late 20s, 30s, and they all have college education. They're working. I mean, that's podcast listeners though, right? They're relatively more serious and, focused and got their lives together or they're trying to, and then podcasts can help them get there.
This is going to be part of your presentation at XYPN 17. So just for listeners that are on the fence about coming and are curious about the various keynote presenters that are going to be talking, can you give me sort of an overview of what you plan to just sort of chat about and educate attendees on?
Sure. My keynote, I'm really excited for it. I think it's important for planners to really understand all of the changes that are happening within relationships right now. And as a planner, how to really best work with couples. Couples come in all shapes and sizes now. It used to be maybe 20 years ago, the man was the breadwinner, the wife didn't work maybe, or took time off work, or they necessarily owned homes and had retirement accounts and were married. And now couples we're finding maybe aren't married, but living together, having kids before they get married. The wife makes more, the husband doesn't work, or they're now in a business together. And, all these different kind of new normals and dynamics that are happening within relationships. It does change what you need when it comes to your financial planning and what matters to you and your hierarchy of financial needs. And as planners, I think it's important to stay in tune to all of these changes. And that's really where the keynote comes in, is what's happening within relationships these days. What are the big trends? How as planners can we really embrace this and talk at the level of where these couples are and understand what their needs are and come at them in a way that is not intimidating, that is really supportive, and that recognizes that even though I find that, even though you're talking to couples, you're still talking to individuals too. When you're in a relationship, especially these days, people are getting married later in life. They're usually coming into the relationship with their own assets, their own histories with money, their own mindsets around money. It behooves planners to really get to know each person in the relationship and understand what their roles are and how they think about money, because that's all going to really help you give them the best advice and win their trust. And make this not just a one and done relationship, but a relationship that really you start to nurture over the years. And as their lives evolve and they get, more busier and more fulfilling lives, and they make more, and they have to, now start preparing for retirement to really be with them throughout all those stages.
What I love about this topic is that I think you've been in this world enough now to feel like this is sort of like the next iteration and the next step. And the truth is that a lot of financial planning conferences, we're still educating male advisors. Like, you have to talk to the female in the room, right? Like when you're talking to a couple, you actually have to talk to the woman, because typically, just research shows, male advisors typically don't talk to the female advisor. We only talk to the male advisor. We just had someone on the podcast that she said that's where a lot of her clients come from, is that they're the females like, screw this, and I want an advisor that'll actually talk to me while we're sitting here together. So your topic is even, 3 steps removed from that into how do we actually create this engaging environment, which I love, because I think we should be able to skip over the steps in between, because it should just be a given. Again, that to your point, the world's changing and we have to be okay with that. We have to accept that, and life, it's just going to look different the way that we work with our clients. And the traditional planning process was really built for what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of your traditional nuclear family, a husband and wife that have been married for 30 years and have 2.2 children and have a white picket fence and want to retire at 65 and have had the same career their whole life. Like, that's just not the way it works. So we better plan for it.
I think my next book, if there is a next book, is going to be on longevity and how to make your money last and how to really extend your financial life. If your actual life is extending, how do you get your financial life to catch up to that? There are probably books out there already on that, but I just think that we can't talk about this enough, especially people don't even realize. I just learned this the other day that I might live to be 120. My instinct was crap,
I need a new financial plan.
Oh my gosh. I need to start working out more, start eating vegetarian. I don't know. But the thing is, the futurists who are saying this also the reason they're saying this is because they predict that by 2030, if you are under the age of 75 and healthy, you will likely live to be an average of 120 years old, because also by 2030, they predict that 8 of the 9 top killing diseases are going to be eradicated. And so your quality of life hopefully will be much better. You're not going to be, like we think of someone who's 120 today, like they're frail, they're not able to do it, get out of the house, or even just a 90-year-old, but maybe by the time we're 90, we'll feel like 90 is the new 60.
And like you're talking, that's a whole other conversation, because that's a world in which you are retired for more years than you're working. Almost twice as many years as you're working.
But I guess you won't be retiring at 60 then,
right? So then how does that change the world when we have people in the workforce, until their 80s or 90s? That fascinating discussion. We could go on about that.
Whoa, my head just exploded.
So I know as we come to a close, I'll ask you sort of our closing question. And that is, if you could go back and tell a younger Farnoosh, maybe this is the Farnoosh that's going to write her first book or is chasing that second book deal. If there's one piece of advice you wish you could go back and give yourself, sort of that one thing you wish you knew then that you know now, what do you think that one piece of advice would be?
I would have told myself to really invest more in building an online audience, because it was 2008. And even though we were all using the internet and blogs were a thing, I just kind of got really into this traditional path of magazines and TV, and that served me really well. But I think I got a late start blogging and communicating with my audience online. And I didn't really leverage that online relationship that was there waiting for me to like tap into. And I just didn't. And I, wish I had done that more and more seriously, because I think it would have been just a lot better for me now to get my thoughts out there.
That makes sense. Well, Farnoosh, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. I am so looking forward to your presentation and hanging out in Dallas.
Likewise. I can't wait to meet everybody. And thank you for having me on the show.
Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.